So good evening, everyone. I would like to call the
Recording in progress.
I would like to call the City Council and Planning Commission special joint meeting for October 5th, 2021 to order. First of all, welcome all commissioners. Thank you for joining us again. There's some stuff I need to read. Pursuant to Section 42 of Executive Order issued by the Governor Newsom, cities allowed to have to hold city council meetings via teleconferencing, and members of the public can observe and address the meeting telephonically or electronically.
I'm sorry, Mayor. I'm sorry, I have to interrupt. It's because of Assembly Bill, not the executive order.
AB 361.
Yes, sir. Sorry.
Yeah, I was reading. I knew something was off. That's why you saw me hesitating there. So yeah, that's a new order. So do I need to repeat anything else?
No, sir. You can keep going.
Okay. So to listen to the meeting telephonically, please call 1-669-900-6833. Meeting ID 811-1858-2184, or through the city's live webcast on YouTube, Connect with TC. Let's see here. So Madam Clerk, roll call the City Council and the Planning Commission, please.
Yes, Mayor. Sorry about that. Councilmember Chavez?
Here.
Councilmember Mann?
Here.
Councilmember Vizcarra? He's here.
So for the record that Councilmember Vizcarra was waving and pointing to his ears up.
Mayor Pro Tem Sternquist?
Here.
Mayor Yu?
I'm here.
Commissioner Guan?
Yeah.
Commissioner Haddad?
Here.
I'm sorry, that was Vice Chair Guan. Commissioner Haddad?
Here.
Commissioner Lee?
Here.
Commissioner O'Leary?
Here.
Chair Cordes?
Fernando Vizcarra.
I think Councilmember Vizcarra may be having some sound issues, so shall we pause and wait just a sec?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Councilman Vizcarra is working on his sound. We could have the 3 to 5 minute public comment period now and then be ready hopefully when he's finished.
Okay, let me do that. Thank you, Mr. City Attorney. So for those calling in, your audio will be unmuted during public comment, and when public comment is open during an agendized item discussion. You can also email your request to speak to cityclerk@templecity.us right now and indicate on the subject line the item you wish to provide comment. We want to open up public comments while we're waiting for Councilmember Vizcarra to work out the sound. So the City Council and Planning Commission will now hear public comments regarding items not listed on the agenda. The city council will keep the public comments open for 5 minutes after the last speaker to allow those who wish to speak to dial in. For those calling in, your audio will be unmuted now. If you wish to speak, please state your name and you'll be added to the speakers list. Speakers will be called on one at a time to speak. You can also email your request to speak to city clerk at templecity.us and indicate on the subject line the item you wish to provide comments. Madam Clerk, do we have any callers?
Mayor, there's one caller, Mr. Sergio Gonzalez. We've asked him to unmute if he wished to speak. And there are no email, public comments, or email requests to speak.
Okay. Mr. Gonzalez, you want to address the council during public comments?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. And if we don't have any calling, Mr. City Attorney, so we cannot quite close it right now, right? We have to keep it open for 5 minutes.
That's correct, sir. Now that we have no one, we go 5 minutes from right now. That gives anyone watching at home the chance to dial in and address the council. 5 minutes is a reasonable period, so we'll use that time. And if we can just all mute for 5 minutes while they reset the clock, and we'll run it from now. And if we don't have anything, we'll move forward.
Okay, thank you.
Perhaps next time we can maybe get some sports highlights or something. I don't know. I guess Greg, they didn't provide for that in the new law, I guess.
Yeah, that might be a good idea.
This is very interesting.
Yeah. Councilmember Viscara, is his sound fixed? Do we even know? Councilmember Viscara, can you hear us?
Hi, this is Ileana. I'm assisting Councilmember Viscara trying to get his audio to work. It should be done shortly.
Okay, we'll wait.
Well, how is everyone? Good?
Good.
How are the kids, Serge, the boys?
trying to find the unmute button there. They're good. They just came from Taekwondo, so they're extra energetic right now. I don't know if you saw earlier, they were punching me, and then my wife graciously took them away. So
Good. Good to hear. They're fine. How about your boys, William? Is William on mute?
Yeah, Adrian's enjoying first grade, so that's good. And
Is he at Longden or La
He's at-
Rosa?
he's at La Rosa.
Good.
Yeah, and Jacob's being circulated between my parents and my in-laws.
Is Helen working from home still, or is she back?
She is. It depends on where her job is. So some days, like today, she's able to work partially from home, but
Well,
other
that's-
days go into the office.
Well, it's nice she can be flexible that way.
Yeah, that part is nice. I'll admit, more flexible than her previous jobs for sure.
Good. Tom, you're being so patient. So proud of you. There you go, Tom.
Hello, can you hear me?
I'm actually watching the ball game. I'm putting my time to
It
get
works,
you.
sir. You're good.
Is Chavez just giving me a bad time?
No, not at all. I'm sitting in my hotel room in San Diego.
Are you? How's the weather? Nice?
Very nice, very clear, very cool, and beautiful.
Good.
All right, so our 5 minutes up. Councilmember Scar, you can hear us loud and clear, I take it.
Yes, sir.
All right, let's continue. I think that we don't see any more email comments, Madam Clerk, right? Within the last 5, right? Nor do I see any phone calls.
Correct.
Okay, so then I will close public comment. We'll move on to the next item, which is new business. So that's the purpose of tonight's meeting, is really the SB 9 urban lot splits. So the council and the plan commission are requested to review and receive the staff report. And should I start with you first, Mr. City Manager, or go straight to Director Reimers?
Thank you, Mayor. I'll be very brief, and I'll turn it over to Community Development Director Reimers. Thank you, Planning Commissioners and Council, for being here tonight. This is probably one of the more consequential pieces of legislation that has come down from a land use perspective from the state in many, many, many years, and will have an impact on the decisions that become before you as the Planning Commission, and in some cases comes before the council, but primarily to you as the Planning Commission. So we thought it was important for you to have a joint meeting tonight for both bodies to hear from each other, and for the bodies for us as staff to hear from you as to some of your concerns and some of what we would consider both the legal limitations, legislative limitations, and just overall planning limitations that this new legislation effective January 1st places on staff. And so that you understand when some things either do not come to you any longer or do come to you, some of the legislative constraints that are bearing down on us in terms of design review and other urban planning tools that we have used over the many decades to help create the urban environment that we've created here in Temple City for so many years. So with that, and we'll look to your direction, and as was discussed before, we will bring back to you through the Planning Commission and through the council as well, some of the very limited options that we have, if that's the desire of both the Planning Commission and inevitably the council to do. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Reimers.
Yes, good evening, council member, planning commissioners, and members of the public that are joining us tonight. Tonight, as we go through SB 9 and urban lot splits, what I'd like to do is to break the presentation down into 3 pieces. First of all, explain what urban lot splits do and what the effects of SB 9 are. provide you some sample site plans, and then talk to you about what are some options the city has as we move forward. And that's really where we're really seeking your input this evening, is as we come back to you with an ordinance to implement this, what initiatives do you want us to move forward on? So first of all, what does SB 9 do? SB 9 converts existing R1 zone properties that typically in most cities have a maximum density of 6 units to the acre, and allows approximately 35 units per acre on those properties. And it does that by saying a single family house can be subdivided into 2 units, or on a lot, you can build 2 units. And on every single family lot, almost every single family lot, you can divide that into 2 lots. So what that means is that a single family, where there's a single family house now, you could subdivide that into 2 lots and build 2 units on each of those. So a single family lot with 1 house now could end up having 4 units. The good news is that includes ADUs and JADUs. So it's not 2 units or 4 units plus ADUs. It's the ADUs are counted as a unit. And each unit we have to allow at least 800 square feet for each of those units. When it comes to the lot sizes, the lots have to be approximately equal in size, and the minimum size is 1,200 square feet. Now, to give you a reference point, our single family zone requires a minimum lot size of 7,200 square feet. So this is a big decrease in the minimum lot size. This ordinance does not, or this law does not apply to every single family zone. There are some carve-outs. One of those carve-outs are urban areas, and that's defined by the census. And so if you're outside of an urban area, you do not have to comply with this law. So on your screen is a map of the urban area that we are in. The urban area boundaries shown in that kind of neon green color. And Temple City is about in the middle there, highlighted in a black line. And so we are within that urban area, so we do have to comply. But areas that are historic, so historic districts or historic landmarks, those do not have to comply with this law. The law sets some maximum setback requirements. So we cannot require any more than a 4-foot rear yard and a 4-foot side yard. And so typically where our rear setback would be 15 feet and our side setback would be between 5 and 10 feet, we can only require a 4-foot side and rear yard setback. If someone wants to subdivide an existing structure, we cannot require any additional setbacks. If they want to tear down an existing structure, they can keep those setbacks if the new unit is of the same size and in the same location. In terms of parking, we can only require 1 parking space per unit. So typically we would require 2 parking spaces per unit. Here we can only require 1. And if one of these lot splits is within a half mile of a high quality transit corridor, or a half mile of a major transit corridor, or within a block of a car share, we cannot require any parking. And so on the next screen.
Scott?
Yes.
Can you give an example of that? So say, for example, my house on Camellia is half a block from Temple City Boulevard, and there's a bus stop there. So that's considered a high transit area?
Well, as I understand it, a major transit stop is the intersection of 2 transit lines that have a headway of less than 15 minutes. Right now in Temple City, with the current service levels, we don't have a major transit stop.
Okay, that gives me a good guide.
Yeah, but we do have a high quality transit corridor, and that's shown on the next slide. This is a map that's prepared by SCAG. They designate the high quality transit areas. And so from this map, you can see that the transit area goes down Las Tunas, then heads south down Santa Anita, and then it also includes a small portion of the southern area of Temple City, just south of Lower Azusa near Temple City Boulevard. So I've highlighted in yellow those areas that are within Temple City, that are within a high quality transit area. So a half mile from those yellow polygons, those yellow shapes, people would not need to provide any parking on site.
Thank you.
So some other limitations in terms of demolition, they cannot demolish or alter a structure in under 3 circumstances. If that structure has a covenant that requires it to be affordable housing, if the city is subject to rent control, or if the housing has been occupied by a tenant within the last 3 years, there is a maximum amount that can be demolished on the site, and that's 25%. In terms of standards, the city is allowed to set some additional standards than it was originally required, that is required in the state law, but those standards have to be objective. We are prohibited from using subjective standards. So we can set a standard like the building can only be 1 story, or the building can only meet a certain height requirement, or a setback of 4 feet. But a subjective standard would be something like a finding that said that the building had to be compatible. So we can set design standards, lot subdivision standards, and zoning standards. In terms of processing, we have to process them ministerially. And what that means is that the process can have no discretion, meaning, so to speak, a planner just goes through a list of check boxes, makes sure that the plan I submitted meets those items. There's really no judgment, personal judgment involved. That's why this cannot go to a public hearing, cannot go to a director's hearing, the planning commission, or council. In terms of right-of-ways and easements, we can require that a back portion of the property have an easement over the front lot so that they can get to the street. Those types of easements are allowed, but we cannot require a dedication of right-of-way. So we cannot require someone to dedicate an area for sidewalk and street purposes. We cannot require construction of off-site improvements. So for instance, typically if someone built a new house and there was no curb and gutter and sidewalk, in some cases we would require them to install that. We cannot do that in these cases. Some other requirements are that the state has acknowledged that they cannot use these urban lots as a short-term rental. So that's sort of Airbnb sort of idea. Again, we're not required to approve ADUs, so accessory dwelling units or junior accessory dwelling units on these properties. The structures can be attached, so we can't set a standard that they must be detached. They can be attached if the applicant wants. And the owner does have to sign an affidavit that the owner intends to live on the site for 3 years. Now, what intend means and how that's enforced is going to be a challenge for staff as we move forward. And then lastly, they cannot subdivide a property as an urban lot more than once. So you can't do an urban lot subdivision and then go back and do another one and another one and another one. You can only do it once. If a person subdivides a property under an urban lot split, they can't then also subdivide an adjacent parcel. So, and then lastly, if there are some non-conforming conditions, which tends to be like a setback that's non-conforming, we cannot require them to modify that in order to make it conforming.
Mr. Reamer, quick question on your previous slide. The owner must live there for 3 years. Let's say we have one lot that's got divided into 2. Must the owner live in both of the future lots, or the owner only lives in one of them and be able to sell or rent out the other one?
I think what the state would say is that the intent there is that they live on one of the original sites. So the original parcel, they have to live on one of those lots.
Mm. Yeah. Okay, thanks.
So now I want to walk you through some site plans that we developed just to kind of demonstrate what this might look like over time. These are conceptual. Think of them as sketches just to see, what we're dealing with. So this first one is a 50-foot wide lot. It's 200 feet deep. So it's pretty deep. Down at the bottom of your slide is the street with a car, the sidewalk, and then you have the building running from there to the back. So what this demonstrates is a 4-foot rear setback along and a 4-foot side setback. These are shown as attached, completely attached. They all have a 1-car garage. They have a 20-foot wide driveway, and that's what we believe the county fire department is going to require for fire access purposes. And what we found here is that with an 800, that even with an 850 square foot unit, that they would remain 1 story. One concern we had was that these would be 2 or even 3-story units. But if we set a cap at 850 square feet in this case, it would still remain as a 1-story development. This is the same lot, 200 by 50. In this case, though, we looked at a 15-foot fire access, which the fire department approves in some cases. And in this case, we set the maximum size at 800 square feet. And what we found was with those 2 changes, reducing the width of the driveway and setting a cap at the building size, was that we were able to get a larger rear setback of 15 feet and a building separation of 16 feet.
I just want to point out, though, building code doesn't dictate side yard setback, but it did say if a wall is within 5 feet of the property or less than 5 feet of the property line, you're required to have 1-hour construction. And I don't see people building at a 4-foot setback with a fire-rated windows, but that's a side point.
This is now a smaller lot that we looked at. This is 50 feet wide, 150 feet deep. In this case, we also showed the 4-foot rear and the 4-foot side setback with the 1-car garages and the 20-foot wide driveway. And what we found was that in order to people to get the minimum 800 square foot unit, they would need to go up to 2 stories. And at 2 stories, no other development standards being set, these developments each unit would be about 1,400 square feet. So if we didn't set a cap, these units would be about 1,400 square feet. In this case, we looked at reducing the driveway size down to 15 feet. And what we found was that doing such would allow for larger units, 1,500 square foot units, still at 2 stories. And in this example, we then placed the cap, the 800 square foot cap, along with the 15-foot driveway. And again, what you see is when that cap is installed, you get some additional separation, 29 feet between the structures. You get a 15-foot rear setback. And so what we're seeing is that capping the size of the units at 800 square feet or somewhere around there helps create some additional open space on the site. And even in this case, we added a 2nd floor step back along the side so that the 2nd floor is set back 4 feet from the 1st floor along the side elevation. So those are some things that we're able to get if we set a cap on the maximum unit size.
Question, Scott.
Yes.
That 800 feet, is that a minimum? Is there a maximum or minimum?
What the state law says is that we have to allow at least an 800 square foot unit. It doesn't have, there's no minimum unit size. You could, if you wanted to do a 400 square foot unit, nothing in the state law would keep you from doing that.
Wait, the state law says we need to have an 800 square foot unit, minimum.
It says we have to allow at least 800 square feet.
Okay, because the junior ADUs are less than 800.
Yes, the junior ADUs are less, yeah.
Which is okay, but is there a maximum cap in each unit?
In the state law, there's not. So that gives us some flexibility. If we wanted to set a cap at 1,000 square feet or 800 square feet, we would be able to do that.
Okay.
And without setting that, you theoretically you could build from side to side with a 4-foot setback around it.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So, oh, sorry, Mayor, did you have something?
Yeah, sorry, I was on mute. Does the state law say anything about floor area ratio and that sort of thing?
The only thing the state law says in regards to floor area ratio and lot coverage is that you can put it in place, but the FAR can't keep you from getting to that 800 square foot unit.
I see. Okay. Thanks.
And this next slide, we played with an idea of removing the driveway entirely. So in this case, there's no parking on site at all, since the state law would allow people to do such a scheme where there's no parking on site. So there's no driveway here. Instead, the building is built around like a bungalow court. It's built around some open space that's shared by each of the units. The open space measures around 2,500 square feet approximately. And so this kind of matches the design scheme that we developed for the R3 zone. One of the benefits you see is that unlike the last 3 designs, this one, by removing the driveway, you're able to bring down the height of the building to 1 story. So you got a 1-story structure built around some common open space.
Is it just me, or did Scott? Can you go back to the previous slide? Doesn't that look like an army barracks or something? I mean, am I? I mean, does anybody else feel like that? I mean, plus, how do you get down a 10-foot driveway? How does a fire engine get down a 10-foot driveway?
So yeah, we're really not working here on the architectural quality of it. It's really just kind of massing diagrams at this point. And I'll show you some examples later on of actual bungalow courts that we could base, an ordinance on if that's what the commission and council are interested in. In this case, the fire department only requires a 20-foot wide roadway for fire access purposes if the length from the back of the building to the street is 150 feet. So in this case,
I'm assuming that's because that's how long their water lines are?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
In this next scheme, we have an even smaller lot, and we do have lots quite a bit that are 50 feet by 100 feet. So they're about 5,000 square foot lots. In this case, we wanted to see, would we have to get up to 3 stories in height? In this case, we have 2-story structures. This does meet the 800 square foot minimum when it's built to all the minimum setbacks of 4 feet in the rear and 4 feet on the side. So in this one, we just barely escaped getting a 3-story structure. If the driveway in this case, for instance, was larger, we likely would need to put in a 3rd story to get to the 800 square feet. This one is a lot that we have some lot configurations in the city that are very wide and shallow. So this is a 90 by 70 foot lot. In this case, the driveway is in the middle and it's 12 feet wide, which would meet fire access requirements. With this narrow driveway, the units would be about 1,250 square feet in size. So because they're 1,250 square feet in size, there are some additional things we can do to improve compatibility. We can require, additional rear setback. So in this case, the rear setback would be around 12 feet. And then we could require some 2nd floor step backs. So here you can see on both side yards, the 2nd floor is stepped back an additional 4 feet. So these were some site plans we just put together so we could see what the issues would be in the future and what development standards we may want to put into place as we go through the development review process.
Director Remus, if you don't mind, I want to just be clear in my mind. 800, like Commissioner Kwan was saying, was really the minimum. But can the city mandate a maximum?
Yes, there's nothing in the state law that keeps us from establishing a maximum.
Does anything in state law that prevent us by saying that if you go this route, you limit it with 1 story?
We can set height limits. We can set based on height or stories, but if that robs someone of an 800 square foot unit, then they can push past that cap.
Okay.
What was it again? I'm sorry.
We can set height limits, but if those height limits keep someone from getting that minimum 800 square feet, then we would have to set aside those height limits.
Oh, okay. For this example that you're showing, 2 stories, is it 4 units or 2 units?
This is 4 units. So,
Or 4 units of 800 each.
yes.
So top and bottom are separate.
Well, and in this model, what we did is we had 2 units in the front and 2 units behind them in the back.
Oh, okay.
Okay. So the last section of the presentation is to present to the council and commission some options we have moving forward. And this is where we could really use some direction from the council and the commission on, what kind of buttons you want to press or what things you want to initiate as we move through this process. The first is related to historic preservation. So properties that are designated historic or are within a historic district do not have to comply with this law. So it would be possible for us to adopt a historic preservation ordinance that allows neighborhoods, for instance, the ability to apply to be a historic district. This type of change would require a significant amount of time and investment from staff. So it's not something we could do right away, but we could begin moving on that sort of initiative.
Hey, Scott, before you go further, it was before your time and probably before everybody's time, except for maybe Cindy and Vince and Fernando. But we tried to go this route at one time, and it met with a lot of pushback from the city. They wanted nothing to do with historic preservation because of the guidelines and the rules and the restrictions that come with that. So I don't know if the law has changed at all since this. It's probably about, I don't know, Vince, what was it, about 8-9 years ago that we even did a full study on this and identified certain areas and locations of historic value of this. I mean, I'm assuming the rules are still the same.
Yes, the rules would basically be the same. Yes, sir.
So I'm just saying, as an option, that might be a tough sell to the public, but remains to be seen, I guess. Yeah.
I've got a couple of buildings that are historic preservation buildings, and it can be a nightmare.
Yeah, and if I remember, you were one of the proponents against adopting.
And would still be.
Good.
Okay. Well, we just wanted to highlight these as options. So, but I do appreciate the feedback.
No, I understand. I'm not trying to cut it off. I'm just saying that we have a little bit of, for want of a better term, history in the historic preservation area.
Yes. The next slide is about impact fees. So when the legislature approved this bill, there was no study done on what the impact would be to both the state and the local infrastructure as this would create more growth. And so one way a lot of cities deal with that unknown is to implement a study to determine how much growth will occur, what the demand on that growth would be on the city's infrastructure, and then establish a fee so that new development pays its fair share of its impact on the infrastructure. And so we could begin an impact fee study to look at that. Those fees could pay for things like parks, for upgrades to the sewer system, upgrades to City Hall, and even in consultation with the county library could fund improvements to their facilities. So that might be a way of dealing with some of the unintended consequences.
Mr. Reamer, if we go this route, are we limited to, must we apply this impact fees to all development, or can we single out SB 9 type of development?
Yeah, it would have to apply to all new development. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Another option would be to require any new units that are urban lot split units to remain affordable. Since the genesis of this law was to create more housing and more affordable housing, we could ensure that these new units are affordable or provided at an affordable rate. at least for the tenants of the new units, the owner might be difficult to assure that they're at an affordable rate. But this would also give us credit towards our annual housing reports and our housing element and arena updates.
And Scott, how would those affordable units for rental be determined?
So there's a formula that comes out every year that sets the affordability rates at very low, low, and moderate. And then it would be up to the council to decide at what rate these would need to be provided, whether at very low, low, or moderate. And then there would be an agreement or covenant that was placed on the property that it was kept at that rate for some amount of time. Typically, when affordable housing comes up, it's a 50-year covenant.
50-year?
Yes, but
wow.
But this is up to the council. I mean, you can set your own guidelines in this case.
And so can you give me an example, say a 2-bedroom, 1-bedroom house at those three, moderate, low, what was the other one? I forget.
Yeah, very low, low, and moderate.
Right.
I don't have it off the top of my head. I've put it together for previous CDBG program presentations, but I don't have it with me today. But I can get back. I can get back.
Okay, thank you.
Another option is to look at the parking. We were expecting to hear, or we would expect to hear, comments from the public about additional development coming along with additional traffic, more parking, more congestion, and so forth. So one way of dealing with that would be to prohibit on-site and off-site overnight parking on these developments. The intention of this law was that this is an urban area, and therefore there was no demand for parking. So we could ensure that by making sure there was no parking on site or off site, and require people to get to the site by walking, bicycling, or taking an Uber or a Lyft, some sort of ride sharing program. The benefit of this is that, as you can see on the slide, there's some great historical examples of bungalow courts, sharing some common open space between the units. And then, as I mentioned in the previous slides, that it also helps bring down the height of these structures from 2 stories to 1 story.
Wouldn't this option presume a whole new way of thinking and culture in our society? Because last time I looked, pretty much every family in Temple City had at least 1 and then probably 2 or 3 vehicles in their family. And then when they start adding more units to their lot, or let's say the children or grandparents, there are additional cars. So what you're saying is that we won't allow any parking of vehicles anywhere in that particular area? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, I'm saying that's what this bill, that was the thesis of this very bill, was that these are urban areas where there is so much transit that people only need to have 1 parking spaces, and in many instances don't need to have any parking. And so one option here would be to say, okay, well, if that's the case, then we're not going to allow on-site or off-site parking.
I guess it gets back to the definition of urban, did you say urban?
Urban lot splits?
Or no, the urban areas. So I know you showed the map, we're considered in so-called urban area, but I guess in the past, when I think of urban area, I think of downtown Los Angeles or downtown Glendale. I don't think of a residential bedroom type area that Temple City is known as, but apparently we're not going to be treated as such anymore. And so I can get the idea of prohibiting on-site and off-site parking in those previous areas that I mentioned. Man, that is going to be a tough sell in an area like Temple City.
And what it might do is it might end up requiring landlords to find tenants who don't have vehicles and are willing to live as if they live in an urban environment. But
I would argue that people who don't have vehicles are probably the ones that can't afford it. And of course, the only people that can afford housing in Temple City right now are people who are fairly well off. So it's kind of a catch-22 situation. Okay. I guess I shouldn't be probably making comments more than I should ask questions, but sorry, this has created a lot of issues in my mind regarding these things. I get it that I think staff has done a great job by identifying the options, and obviously the question is whether they will work in Temple City. I guess ultimately is what we need to decide.
Another thing that we may want to look at is that the state, in approving this law, did not look at the environmental impact of increasing the density of single-family zones throughout the state. So in order to deal with that reality, the city may be interested in looking at other ways of ensuring that we don't, or that we minimize our impact on the environment. And that could be done by requiring new housing to be LEED certified, which is a program that certifies structures to make sure that they're environmentally have minimal impact on the environment. There's also a new program called Pearl certification that does the same. So what that might look like would be additional air filtration, solar power, triple pane windows to increase energy efficiency, stormwater runoff systems, additional landscaping to reduce urban heat island effect, and so forth. We do need to come back with some new development standards. Some cities may just rely on their existing single-family zoning, but we may want to set some standards that are very specific to these urban lots, such as a maximum unit size. So that's demonstrated here. We may also want to set a different height limit for these developments. We may want to set some open space requirements, may want to come back with some parking standards. And then also we may want to input some things like a front porch requirement. And then we may also want to look at adjusting existing regulations. So what I mean by that is the city allows for flag lot subdivisions right now. And we also allow for just a regular lot split. When if you have a 100-foot wide property, you can subdivide it into two 50-foot wide properties. We may want to rethink that because where you have a single lot now, that could be subdivided into two flag lots, and then the flag lots could then be subdivided into two urban lots. So we may want to rethink our existing regulations there.
Scott, I have a question regarding, can someone apply for a lot split? And I believe it was, what was it? A maximum size was 1,200 square feet?
Yeah. Minimum, yeah.
Or the minimum. Can someone apply for a lot split and then not build an ADU on it or an additional unit?
I think, well, there is a residency requirement. So the owner has to live there for at least 3 years. So they would have to build a structure.
So they would have to build a structure.
Yeah.
Okay. What if the owner was living in the structure and there were other homes on the property? Could they split that lot and potentially sell the others?
Yeah, I think that might happen. So for instance, on slide 33, the one we're looking at right now, there's an example of a flag lot subdivision. So if somebody owned lot number 1 and lived on lot number 1, they could then subdivide lot number 2 using an urban lot split and continue to live on lot number 1. I think that would be allowed.
Wow, so many changes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, just incredible.
Well, let me see if I hear it correctly. When you answer Mayor Pro Tem's question, you said, using the diagram on the left. So one lives in one and split the lot by flat lot into 2, and then they take number 2 lot and split it into 2 other lots. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah. Yes.
And that does not stop them from splitting number one as well, right? So you can continually split until the yield is less than 800 square feet, right? Just basically you can take a large parcel, and we have quite a few of those in the city, just keep splitting them one after the other.
Not exactly.
That could be correct?
Not exactly. Once you do an urban lot split on a property, you can't do another one. So you only get to do an urban lot split once.
I see.
So this, on the picture on the left, it was not urban split. It was a flag lot. It was split, prior to this urban thing. So then it can be split one more time for each. Lots 1 and 2 can split into 2. So this can become 4 lots.
Yes. Yep.
Even though they may be under 2 different owners currently.
That's correct.
Okay. Wow.
And then just have one last slide, or actually 2 more, sorry. We also have the ability to input some design standards. Now they can't be guidelines. They do have to be standards, so they likely would be numerical in nature. So that's another initiative we could implement as staff. And then lastly, just wanted to end with some next steps. In terms of next steps, we're looking at holding a planning commission meeting. This is tentative on November 9th to bring back an ordinance to implement these changes in Temple City. And then we would then have a meeting with the city council on December 7th for them to receive the planning commission's recommendation. And that would likely be an urgency ordinance that would then take effect the very next day on December 8th. And then there would also, then the state law doesn't become effective until January 1st. So on January 1st or January 2nd, someone could come into City Hall and actually apply for an urban lot split under the state law. And then we would have our own ordinances in place that would also work on those. And just a note, something the city attorney mentioned earlier was that we would propose to bring to you, council, an urgency ordinance and a regular ordinance through the process. And that concludes my presentation.
Okay. So what we'll do next is that we would ask the Plan Commission to go ahead to move forward with the questions, and then the City Council would follow with our questions. So with that, I turn the floor over to Chair Cordes. Can you ask your commissioners if there are any questions from the commission?
Thank you, Mayor Yu. Yeah, our normal procedure in commission is to do a round of questions for the presenter, and then to come back again and enter into discussion with the commissioners. So we will, at this point, open up questions to the commissioners, and then I'll turn it back to Mayor Yu, and he can do the same thing, and we'll proceed from there. So with that in mind, and I know there's been a lot of questions already, and there've been good questions. So let's keep it moving. And I'll ask, first of all, Vice Chair Guan, if you can unmute, and if you have any other questions that you'd like to ask Director Reimers.
Yes, too many questions, and then don't know where to start. And frankly, I would like to go from item to item and ask the questions, but I think it takes too long. So,
and keep in mind that we have a council meeting in about 30 minutes.
Yes, that's why I'm not going to and but we do not have to make a decision tonight on all these items that that you proposed, right, Scott?
That's right. We're just looking for feedback from the commission. So if you do have a bunch of questions that I'm happy to meet with you one-on-one, and then we can walk through all of them. So if you just want to focus on, maybe some of the overarching ones or ones that you want to make sure everybody hears the answer to.
Okay.
That might be more efficient.
I would like to have a copy of this, and I will make my questions on each item and then send it to you that way. And then after you had a chance to look at it, maybe we can discuss in the next meeting, or addressing all the comments, the questions, or, in an email is fine.
And I believe the schedule calls for a planning commission meeting in early November to pursue this a little further. So.
Okay,
opportunity
okay,
as well.
okay. I think it's better to do it that way for me. So I can, if you can email it to me, and then I'll just write my questions under each comment, under each items, and we'll take it from there.
Will do.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Yeah, thank you, Beverly. Let's move on to Commissioner Lee, if you would unmute and address any questions you have to the director.
Yeah, hey, Director Reimers, I thought that was a really informative presentation. I do have one point of clarification that I need or hoping to get, which is you spoke about the option of having buildings be more environmentally friendly or LEED certified. Can you explain to me why that is like a tool or an option in the toolbox? Well, like, what's the thinking behind it? Because I didn't follow that.
Yeah, sure. So if, for instance, if we came to the commission and said we wanted to raise the density in a zone by 5 times of what it is presently, we would have to go through an environmental study, and that environmental study would likely demonstrate that that would have an effect on the environment. We would then create what are called mitigation measures to reduce those impacts as much as possible, so that the impacts are less than significant. We can't, the state didn't go through that mitigation measures sort of process. And since the state didn't go through it, we might want to institute our own mitigation measures, in quotes. And one of those might, the simplest way of doing it without, being too subjective, is by just requiring these units to be, to meet some sort of standard like LEED certification.
Okay, so basically, because the state does not have to go through CEQA, we are trying to mitigate that circumvention in some way. Is that kind of right?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Okay, cool, thanks. Got it. No question. No other questions.
Okay, thank you, Jeffrey. Let's move on to Commissioner O'Leary, if you would unmute and address your questions. You're still muted.
Now?
Yeah, got it. Thanks, Tom.
I guess I cut to the chase. I have a question for Mr. Murphy. If that's okay.
I'm here, sir.
Is there a way to stop a SB, like maybe the Supreme Court of the state or the country? Can that happen?
My understanding, sir, is that there's currently a constitutional amendment initiative being circulated. But I have heard that people are trying to sue about the legality of the Senate bill. I haven't suggested that any of my clients join those suits because I don't believe that the bill on its face is illegal. So that initiative or constitutional amendment initiative would be the best way to restore local control. Until that goes through, I think Mr. Reimers has given us a lot of tools for dealing with what we're going to have to deal with for at least the first portion of 2022.
Okay, thank you. Well, he's the perfect guy to figure out all the ways we should go about it. So great. I'm glad there's maybe some wiggle room, but it would take time, I understand. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Tom. Let's move on to Commissioner Haddad. If you would unmute and address your questions to Director Reimers.
Thank you, Chairman Cordes. And thank you, Director Reimers, for that presentation and the report from your staff. It's a lot of information. And I guess my 2 cents, I understand the motivation from the state that there's a housing crisis, that they're trying to come up with creative ways to make the housing crisis more manageable. But there are a lot of things here that are happening, and all the buttons that you shared with us that we can possibly push, I think are ways that we can maybe slow down the train. So if that's the sentiment of the council and the commissioners, I think when we look at those options that you're giving us, even though they may not be the most favorable, like no cars, no parking, I can see that being a tool in a sense to slow down that train, because then it makes it less likely, maybe a little less likely to try for a developer to want to do an urban lot split. So that's just my overarching impression. But I do have one question about the impact fees. I know you said that you cannot single out urban lot splits to have an impact fee, that it has to be applied to all new developments. But can we have like some type of tiered impact fee system? So, you know, the greater the lot splits, the greater the impact in my mind. So if somebody did one new development, the impact fee could be a lot less, a much lower cost. So it's not gonna, you know, stop a developer from investing in the community for something like a single family home. But if somebody wanted to do like an urban lot split, can it be a scaled up exponential impact fee that might be more cost prohibitive for somebody to want to do that?
So theoretically, yes. Impact fees are highly regulated, and they do need to be based on real studies of numbers. What impact fees tend to demonstrate is that if it's done by unit, that multifamily development has lesser of an impact on open space or on libraries and on sewer systems, but that's per unit. So while if you built a single family house on one parcel and your impact fee was $20,000, if you were to build 4 units on that same parcel, the impact fee collected by the city would be $80,000, something like that. But generally what happens with impact fees is that the denser the development, the less per unit charge is developed. And that's just kind of big picture.
I see. So it's almost the inverse of that idea.
Yeah.
But I mean,
Because
it has to be justified that way, or is it up to the discretion of the city?
It's because with the denser the unit, the less occupants there typically are. And the less occupants, the less impact there is on infrastructure.
And in addition to that, Commissioner Haddad, one other measure we'd have to take is kind of do a very rough Proposition 218 legal analysis as well, to make sure that we're covered under the law with those kinds of regulatory fee schemes.
Okay. All right. That was just an idea that I wanted to learn more about. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Serge. I'm going to limit my questions just to one, and then I'll turn it over to Mayor Yu again for questions from council. But my question has to do with the affidavit that needs to be signed, the intent for the owner to stay in place for 3 years. And I know Scott has already italicized the word intent, but I got to ask the question. So a person, an applicant, can file an intent and then, after 6 months, change his mind and move somewhere else. And the enforceability of that, what recourse do we have?
Well, that's a great question. And how does the city find out if the owner is not occupying the structure? It's difficult. We're going to require inspections every 6 months to determine whether the person is living there. And if they're not living there, how do you legally require them to move back to that location? I think it was well intentioned, but I don't think the mechanics of it were completely thought out.
Yeah. Meanwhile, the lot has been split. You've got 2 tiny little lots, 2 tiny little houses, 4 tiny little houses, and the owner's gone.
Yeah.
So, yeah. It's I see a lot of issues with this, unfortunately.
Yes, sir.
And I know the intention was good. Anyway, thank you, Scott. And at this point, I'm going to turn it back to Mayor Yu, and I'll save the rest of my discussion for our last pass through this.
Okay, thank you, Chairman Cordes. So I'm going to go through and call on our city council members for any additional questions that have not been asked. And knowing that 7:07, and so I will start with Councilmember Chavez. Any further questions?
Scott, can you speak real briefly about what was the goal of SB 9?
The goal was to provide more housing, additional supply of housing to help reduce the cost of housing.
Okay, so I guess, so they assume that this new housing is going to be, quote, affordable housing?
Not essentially, not necessarily.
Yeah, well, I don't think it's going to be, but I mean, if they want more housing so people can have it available, that's one thing, but how can they afford it at the same time? So, okay, Senator Atkins, where is he from?
I think he's from San Diego County.
Oh, okay. All right, so he's down here in San Diego. Okay. This is more of a quick question for Greg. Greg, these options that have been proposed, have we kind of vetted those out from a legal standpoint? Are we on good grounds as far as being able to enact these types of ordinances to offset the impact of SB 9?
In terms of the general concepts presented tonight, yes. As Mr. Reimers and his staff begin putting them together based on your input tonight, we'll keep working with them to make sure the specific details are as defensible as possible. But before we really drill down on those details, we wanted to hear from you all tonight on what your priorities were, if there were things you didn't want Scott and his team to do. No use kind of wasting our legal time drilling down on things that weren't going to be options for you. But
so do you guys want then to hear from it as to which of the 6 options we want you to focus on then? Or, I mean, is that ultimately the goal tonight? Because I haven't heard anybody talk about any of the options so far.
I think that would be really helpful for us as staff.
Okay, well, from my standpoint, I mean, I think historic preservation is going to be a long shot because we have looked at that issue in the city before and it didn't fly the first time. I don't know that it will fly again. I like the impact fees on existing infrastructure. I think if you're going to do something like that, you should pay your fair share. Getting to Commissioner Haddad's point, maybe some type of equitable fee share that the people who do it, who are taking advantage of this versus those who are not, maybe a different fee structure than that. I mean, I like the idea of affordability requirements. I mean, if that seems to be the original intent of the bill, I'm not sure it's going to play out that way, but certainly that's a worthy way to go. Parking and traffic, I don't know, that's going to be a tough sell. I remember it makes me think about when we wanted to put bike lanes in and our whole city came apart, and convincing people to give up their cars and start riding bikes or taking public transportation may be a tough sell as well. Environmental impacts, I like that idea. I mean, obviously, this is I think it's going to have a big environmental impact. And then, of course, it's always good to have new development standards, I think, especially when you're faced with something like this. So anyway, that's my 2 cents on the options that were presented. To get to Mr. Corda's statements, I think, and I've said this before, this is a typical state legislation without thinking ahead of the impact and also the enforcement issues, and simply taking the position that we'll let the local governments figure that out. And that's what's happening here, I think. So that's all I have, Mayor. You.
All right. Thank you, Councilmember Chavez. Moving on to council questions. Councilmember Mann, any further questions?
Yes, thank you, Mayor Yu. Scott, does SB 9 apply to other zones like R2, R3 mixed use?
Sorry. No, it only applies to single family zones.
Okay, then my next question is, if you compared what SB 9 allows in terms of density per acre, which is more denser, R2, R3, or the new R1 standard?
The new, well, this new urban lot subdivision in Temple City's context will likely end up at 35 units per acre, which is approximately the R3 zone. So it would likely be higher than the R2.
So what would happen if we rezone the entire city R2?
It was a thought I've had. I didn't propose it because I didn't think it was politically possible. But it's definitely a possibility. We could rezone all the R1 areas to R2 and avoid the urban lot split requirements that way.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a lot of second, third, fourth order repercussions that I haven't thought through, but that was the first thing that came to my mind was that. And I guess just another question. How does this affect our current requirements for open space? Because it seems like a lot of the examples you provided, there seems to be a lot of hardscape if lot splits were done.
Yeah, it's going to be a dramatic impact on open space. If you think about our single family neighborhoods, they already have large front yards, even backyards, which is probably why the city's been so successful despite the lack of parks. We've had very large yards to play in. If these areas get subdivided and large fire access roads get built and setbacks get reduced to 4 feet, people will have nowhere to recreate. And so you're going to see a large demand on open space, I believe.
Okay, thank you. That's all the questions I have.
Thank you, Councilmember Vizcarra. Any further questions?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
It's working. Can you go back to the previous slide?
You want the one with the initiative?
Yeah.
Member? Yeah. There you go.
Well, just off the top of my head, well, in fact, let me preface this first. You and I did a one-on-one on existing zoning and that. I'd like to do that again on this because I feel a little more comfortable when you have some time.
Will do.
The historic preservation, of course, gives me heartburn. Affordability requirements, also parking and traffic. I think that's really a problem. Environmental impacts, I'm okay with that. I think we probably need to pursue that. And the design standards, that's a little scary. And I do have other questions, but I'd rather have a better understanding of the overall bill. So I'll wait till we have a chance to go over it again.
Very good.
One thing I wasn't hearing, and it's probably simplistic, but height requirements or stories. Is that mitigated in any way?
Well, so the bill doesn't address height, so we can't establish a height requirement. Under the R1 zone, we're only allow 2 stories maximum, but the council also passed an ordinance within the last few years that said that if you're on a flag lot, which is essentially what this would be, if you're on a flag lot, you're only allowed to do a 1-story house. So it's clear to me that the council's desire would be to keep these as 1-story structures. But as I showed in the slides, that's going to be impossible in order to meet the 800 square foot requirement on small lots. But we will come back with some height requirements.
Well, that could also be a useful control measure, couldn't it?
Well, we can try and use height, but if the height gets in the way of someone getting an 800 square foot unit, then the height limit would be set aside.
And we would be compelled to do that?
Yes.
Okay. We'll talk some more. Thank you.
Okay, very good.
Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem Sternquist, you have any further questions?
I have a question. Now I lost my Zoom page. There we go. Scott, technically, this bill eliminates our R1 zone potentially, right? Because pretty much anybody can do whatever it seems they'd like to do within those requirements for lot splits. I mean, it seems that when you said that you had thought about the R2, zoning the whole city R2, it's the first thing that came to my mind too, also. And you said, well, you weren't sure politically. Were you talking politically with the council or politically with our legislatures? Because with them, I really don't care at this point because they're just taking away local control.
I was thinking locally. I think a citywide change from R1 to R2 would bring us a lot of comment from the public.
Okay. Negative comment?
Yes.
But I think it would be because they're not educated in what we're losing with this bill, as far as having, the nice front yards or the nice backyards.
Yep.
Right. I mean, it seems that the educational piece would really have to come into play, because if someone isn't aware of what SB 9 is at this point, they're not going to be aware of it until you say, hey, we're changing your zone from R1 to R2, and then they're going to take notice. But I think that's where the city can come into play. I mean, in your opinion, if we rezone the whole city to R2, it solves a lot of problems for us, correct?
Well, it may and it may not. The issue here is we don't know yet what the demand is for this sort of thing. So we might be getting a bit ahead of ourselves. Once perhaps we see what the demand is, then we may want to take that step. It is a big step. It's a big leap to take.
Okay. I don't have any other questions. I just think that somehow we need to get ahead of this before we have a flood of people coming in. I mean, it's already happening on my street with second units and no parking available. It's just going to continue to be at that point where there are no more backyards with green space, even with the ADUs. And now if we have the lot splits, it's just going to be exacerbated even more. I don't know what the answer is, but I think we're all clever enough to figure something out together. And that's it.
Okay, thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. I only have a couple questions, and one of them was already asked, and I'll save my comments on this for our next segment. The two questions I have is kind of analogous to what Councilmember Min had asked. Currently, we have permeable standards. This doesn't set aside that permeable standards, right?
No, it doesn't.
And then in our current code, we have the design incentives. Again, this doesn't set aside design incentives.
It does. Well, it does in some cases. So for instance, we have a design incentive related to architectural style. That would be a subjective requirement. So we wouldn't be able to institute that.
Well, we can easily change that by, I don't know, requiring the plans being designed and stamped by an architect or landscape architect. But anyway, I'll move on to those two are my questions. So at this time, I'd like to open up for public comments. And Madam Clerk, are there any email comments?
Yes, Mayor, I do have one.
Could you please read it?
Yes, it is from Don Chen. And the email public comment is, how would this bill affect property tax assessment? And that's the only public comment email.
And do you want to address that, Director Remus?
I can take a shot at it. If someone is demolishing a structure and building a new structure, their property taxes would be reassessed. If somebody's doing an addition to a property, those building permits are reviewed by the assessor's office, and tax rates are assessed differently in those instances. But if someone is interested in doing this and wants to know what the tax implications are, it'd be best for them to reach out to the tax assessor's office.
Okay.
And let me just add, sir, that if the commenter is concerned as a neighbor, there would be no impact on your lot if your neighbor decided to do this. The impacts would be, physical to your lot, but there would be no tax impacts to your lot.
Okay. And moving on, at this point, do we have any callers who would like to address the City Council?
Mayor, we will unmute any callers.
Do we have any callers? Please address the City Council if you want to address the council. Hearing none, yes.
We've requested callers to unmute their audio if they wish to speak.
Okay. Now, Mr. City Attorney, is there a 5-minute limit here? According to AB 61?
There continues to be a reasonable time limit, given that this is not an action item, but an input item, and
right.
The public can give input in other ways before this even goes to the Planning Commission. If we can just give, if the city clerk can just give us maybe 60 seconds more to make sure nobody calls in, I think that would be reasonable for this item.
Yeah, Madam Clerk, would you, I don't know if you have a timer ready, but.
We would have to disable Scott's ability to share so we could put up the clock.
That's fine. If you can just count it, just let us know when 60 seconds is done, ma'am.
Mr. Mayor, if there are members of the public who are listening or end up watching this presentation later, they can always contact the planning department at planning@templecity.us. That's the easiest way of reaching us, planning@templecity.us. And we can send them copies of the legislation, of this presentation, or anything else.
While we're waiting, perhaps I can talk about our timing. It's 7:25 right now. I hate to leave this on without any comment to staff. So, Mr. City Manager and Mr. City Attorney, are there any legal reason why we cannot start our regular meeting a little later to allow for this meeting to finish?
I see none, sir. The public hearing tonight doesn't have a time certain, so I think you're just fine continuing this until you're finished.
Yeah, because we're so close.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. All right, the time is up, so I'll close public comments, and then now is the time to give staff any final comments or any questions. And again, I'll turn the floor over to Chairman Cordes.
Okay, thank you, Mayor Yu. Yeah, at this point, we would normally go around the planning commissioners and give each one an opportunity to comment on it based upon what you've heard. I think Director Scott and staff has done an excellent job of teeing this up on very short notice. The structure is great. So I think to expedite this, if we could follow the options for the city initiatives, And if you could address your comments primarily to those, but if you have other comments, I don't want to hold you back either. So why don't we go around? Let's start with, this time with Commissioner Haddad. If you would unmute and we would welcome your comments.
Thank you, Chairman Curtis. Yeah, and after listening to everybody's thoughts on these items, I mean, everybody, I think, brought up some really good points. I think the perspective here is really like, do these help us slow down the process of SB9 in some way? And I think there is merit to all of them, including ones that may be unpopular, like not allowing on-site or off-site parking on a lot division. I know that sounds a little bit far-fetched, and it's a culture shift, especially in a county like Los Angeles. But maybe that'll help with the process. So I'd be interested in learning a little bit more about the pros and cons for each one of these items. I know that there was an idea about making things R2, but and theoretically, an R2 would make it less dense, maybe than this 2 sublot division and then 2 units per sublot, but it still, makes it more dense. So it's almost like, you're between a rock and a hard place if you choose that path. So that would be my comment. I just know that we're going to have a continuing discussion in the next month, so I'd like to learn a little bit more about these options and maybe some more creative solutions. So thank you.
Thanks, Serge. Let's go to Commissioner O'Leary. If you would unmute and give us your input on this, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think that if we have Mr. Murphy and Mr. Reimers and his staff put together all the things that they deem necessary for this to work to the best of that it can, I think is a good idea. I think with the input from the city attorney will help a lot. So that's it.
Thanks, Tom. Let's go to Commissioner Lee. If you would unmute and address your comments, please.
Yeah, I basically echo the previous comments from the commissioners. I personally think that there needs to be more discussion on what the cons are, right? Like, because we see the benefits to some of these and how they can mitigate, but what are some of the unintended consequences or the things that we're not talking about just yet? So basically, it's a long way of saying I think we need a little bit more discussion on that. Even with parking and traffic, maybe there's a way to utilize that tool, or I'm pretty agnostic about historic preservation, but maybe there's a way to use that effectively in certain cases. Again, it's a long way of saying I think we need to flesh this out a little bit more.
Okay, thank you, Jeffrey. Let's go to Vice Chair Guan. If you would unmute and give us your comments, please.
Yes. With all the comments from the commissioners and council members, and we all agree that there are too many things that we need to flesh out on each and every initiative that staff has put together. Personally, I think there's a long discussion needed for each and every single item that is in the initiative before we can finalize. And just for the fact that how many of you would think we can survive in Temple City without a car? At the moment, I think it's challenging. At least it's challenging for me and my family now with no car living in Temple City at this time. We're not quite there yet. The conveniency of public transportation at this location at the moment are not ready for that yet, to me. So we'll have a long discussion later, item by item in detail. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Beverly. Okay, let me kind of sum up here my thoughts on this. I want to go back to what Councilman Chavez said about a cultural change. I happened to move into Temple City in 1972, shortly after it became a city. And we were in the process of moving from a county rural area to a suburban area. And that's kind of where we're at now. And this would push us further. My comments are, they would push us further into an urban area. And I don't think that we have the infrastructure in place to support a lot of this, including transportation, including everything from utilities, and I won't go into all of it, but it is a cultural change. And I've kind of been looking at this through one eye for the last year while it's been discussed in Sacramento. Now that I've actually seen the bill, it has changed a little bit. I want to work with it as best I can. I think that there are some areas that could be abused in it. And I know what the intent was, but I think I do. Anyway, let me go real quickly through the list of incentives, because I wanted to give Director Reimers some ideas. What I look for is what I call the low-hanging fruit, the easy ones. And I think we definitely need new development standards for the lot split. Initially, I thought we would have to retrofit this and address all of our ordinances dealing with this, but it doesn't appear that that's how we're going to do this. This is going to be a separate carve-out piece, if I'm using that term correctly. So I think we do need new development standards around that. Some design standards, yes, and adjusting existing regulations, yes. Impact fees, I'm not sure what those are, but if it has to do with keeping Temple City finances in shape, I'm all in favor of it. The city enjoys a very high standard, according to what I'm reading from the state auditor. And for the past 3 years, our finances have been one of the best cities in the area. And I'd sure like to keep it that way. Environmental impact, yeah. Let's see, traffic and parking. This is a tough one. I'm going to skip this one. I don't think this is low-hanging fruit. Affordability requirements, I've also got mixed feelings on this. I think I would look at this as a way to control some abuse in this. If we did have some affordability requirements, what I would not want to see is unscrupulous developers doing lot splits and putting up more affordable housing, unaffordable housing. So smaller pieces of property at more expensive prices. I think that's the worst case scenario. So I'd look at the affordability requirements as a way to counter that, perhaps. Historic preservation, there's been some discussion of it. I know I was on the Planning Commission when this came up a number of years ago, along with Commissioner O'Leary. And yeah, I agree, this is going to be a difficult sell to our community. Although personally, I wouldn't mind taking a look at it, but I think it's going to be a tough sell. Those are my comments. I hope this has shed some light on it and gives you some ideas to move forward. And at this point, I'll turn it back to Mayor Yu.
Thank you, Chairman Cordes, and thank you, commissioners. And very quickly, we'll go around the city council members for their comments and any final question, starting with Councilmember Chavez.
Thank you, Mayor Yu. First of all, I just want to express my disappointment in the fact that we only gave this an hour and a half to look at. I don't think it's nearly enough time, as indicated by the comments by everyone tonight, to throw this in front of a council meeting, especially, I think, did not give it its due justice. And I think, you know, if we were going to do this jointly, we should have done it separate and apart and allowed him much more time to take a look at this, because there have been a lot of good things stated, a lot of good questions, which we've simply run out of time. So again, maybe next time we'll think about that in the future. I just want to get one thing straight, Scott, maybe you can answer. So it sounds to me like one of the options that you did consider but did not put it down, and that is this changing the zoning. Am I correct in that assumption? That's so, because it's been mentioned a couple of times about just, well, to overcome this rule or this law, all we need to do is change it from R1 to R2. Is it that simple?
Well, typically, if you were to double the density of a zone, you'd have to go through a zone change process. You'd have to notify the property owners, and you'd have to go through an environmental clearance.
I understand that there's a
required
process that you
environmental
would, I understand there's a process you would go through, but let's assume that process, we did go through that and it went through the process. Is that going to avoid the implementation of SB 9 completely?
No.
Okay.
Well, SB 9 only applies to single family zones.
Okay, so that's what I mean. So it would then. So SB 9, if the entire city went from an R1 to an R2, SB 9 would not apply to the city of Temple City. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
But obviously to get to that point would be next to impossible. Certainly would have political ramifications, I'm assuming.
Yes, sir.
All right, so although that's thinking kind of outside the box, I don't know that I would necessarily, it is an option, but not one that is down on the list. Okay, well, I think all the questions have been asked, or at least that are going to be asked. Obviously, there's more information we need. Well, just as I said earlier, another indication of a state legislature basically framing something with a good intent, that is to provide more affordable housing. The consequence, as we all know, is going to be less green area and creating an environment that is up to the local government to enforce, which will be almost impossible to do so. Basically leave us holding the bag. Anyway, doesn't surprise me. Thank you, Mayor Yu.
Thank you, Councilmember Chavez. Next, Councilmember Mann, any final comments?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Yu. Yeah, when I asked the question about the R2, I was half joking, but it was kind of also an expression that I think SB 9 is kind of a joke. So, but unfortunately, it's passed, and we're dealing with it. But similar to what Councilmember Chavez mentioned, I think even if it sounds like a silly idea, I think it's worth at least looking at it from a theoretical standpoint. Just what are those other ramifications that we haven't really considered down the line? Like, for example, I don't know if you can, or we as a city can sort of change the R2 guidelines to make it less dense than it is now. From what I recall, it seems like there's state guidelines in place that prevent us from doing anything that downzones something. Like if you're gonna change the zone, it always has to be up. At least that's what I remember.
Yes.
So I don't know what those ramifications are. But in terms of the options for city initiatives, I think the one that I think would be hard for us to justify is historic preservation, because it seems like the only one that would not be applied uniformly across the board. I mean, I have a hard time imagining us saying the entire city's going to be under a historic preservation zone. So there would be this subjective process that it seems like we have gone through before, and we ran into roadblocks. So to me, that just seems, I don't know, unless there was a compelling reason that it could actually be a tool for us, I don't see any usefulness in having staff look into that in more detail. Maybe like a rehash of what was done before and just summarizing what those issues are would probably be enough to satisfy my curiosity. The the one thing that stands out for me out of all of these is affordability requirements, because if we're really stuck with SB 9 and it doesn't get overturned by other ballot initiatives, maybe that's the one initiative where we can get the best of both worlds, so to speak, where if someone really was going to be doing lot splits and you have this affordability requirement, then you may end up solving, or at least partially solving, one of the other problems we hear our residents talk about, which is houses in Temple City are really expensive, especially the new ones. And at the same time, if you had a developer or someone who was really trying to just use SB 9 to make profit, maybe this deters them from doing that. But I don't know where that balance is. Like, where is that so-called sweet spot from a policy standpoint that allows us to achieve both ends? And it seems like a complex question because there's market forces at play, there's material construction forces at play. I mean, it's just, the more I think about it, I don't even know how we would ask staff to really present that. But I guess that's what I'm asking, is maybe is there a way we can have kind of both things, kind of have our cake and eat it too, so to speak. As for the other things, I am interested to see what impact fees would look like. If you could educate us on sort of the timetable and the amount of money and effort it would take to undergo a study that allows us to move towards the impact fees, I'd be interested in that. I agree with Commissioner Haddad's comment on parking and traffic. I think even though it seems really far-fetched, but really we're looking at these as theoretical policy tools. I mean, we're not saying the moment we allow this, everyone's going to rush in and start building lots with no on-site parking at all. I think the market forces at play in terms of what is the actual demand from people buying homes is, in my mind, is going to balance this massive rush to develop these types of projects. I think, like Commissioner Guan said, if we don't have the transportation infrastructure in place, it seems hard for a developer to justify, well, I'm going to build that type of housing just because the city allows me to, right? So I'd be interested just to see what that looks like theoretically. Environmental impacts, again, I think it's worth looking at, just because, again, these are tools to perhaps deter developments. And again, design standards, development standards, and adjust existing regulations, I absolutely think we need to look at that. I'm particularly interested to see how we would modify our existing subdivision guidelines and requirements, so that, is there a way we can prevent a subdivision than an urban lot split? I don't know if that's possible. But that would be sort of my question. Do we have any control over that from a policy standpoint? And my last overarching comment is, I want to remind everyone, we do have a general plan that's still pretty new. I think, in my opinion, the cornerstone of that general plan is to preserve the single-family neighborhood of Temple City. I believe that still holds true. And so I always look back at that as sort of the central policy guidance in terms of what we would like it to do. So how do we reconcile the general plan we have with all these things that seem to strip away what we put together? That's all the comments I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Viscar.
I think Councilman Mann made excellent points there, and those are a lot of the thoughts that were going through my mind. And I'm wondering, are we all thinking that this is going to make for an eventual land rush? Do we really have a concern that the developers are going to come galloping in and raping and pillaging, as it were, taking advantage of SB 9 and the ability to make money from it? I don't know. I have I wish there was some way to predict what the outcomes are going to be. One of well, there's a lot of things really, but one of the things I was thinking about too is listen to the news, we keep talking about inflation and Janet Yellen's concern that we might be heading for a large recession. That's going to affect things, and what that effect is going to be, there will be an effect, but we don't know what it's going to be. There won't be that much money floating around out there, and there'll be people looking for ways to make it. Those are just kind of random thoughts that I can't gel. I haven't gelled yet. So we'll just have to, I guess we're just going to have to dig in and look at, get into the weeds and get as much detail as we can so we can, I guess, protect ourselves, protect the city. Those are my thoughts.
Thank you, Councilmember Scar. Mayor Pro Tem Sternquist, any comments?
Yes. Am I muted?
No, we can hear you loud and clear.
Okay, thank you. I think something that I was still wondering about, Scott, was, the Assembly somewhat bragged that they conceded some power to local jurisdictions, and that was to allow agencies to deny some housing projects if the building official found that the project would have a specific adverse impact upon health and safety or the physical environment. And that it couldn't be mitigated. How can we use that to our advantage?
That's a good question, and I haven't really heard a lot from either people in the planning world or in the building world talking about that yet. It's a very, very high standard. It's one of the highest standards that's in state law. And it doesn't talk about general welfare. It talks about only health and safety. And in the past, it's been a high standard in that in the construction of this building, for instance, that it would have an impact on the health and safety of someone living on an adjacent property. So for instance, if you're building on a hillside and that hillside does not have soil capacity to withhold the structure, then that could have a very real public safety impact on the adjacent properties. Those are the types of issues that would, in the past, have been affected by that sort of public safety requirement, health and safety requirement.
Okay, well, I think that if we could explore that more thoroughly, because it is the only one avenue that they gave to cities saying, this is your local control with SB 9. So I think we need to explore that, to use that to our advantage. And also, when you have an R1 zone, SB 9 deals with R1 specifically, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so it says that those projects can be done ministerially, right?
Yes.
Is that the case for R2 zones?
No, R2 zones, you go through a public hearing or have a discretionary process.
So that in itself seems to me that it would be worth exploring, making the city R2, even though it might be politically not so nice, because that puts the projects back into the jurisdiction's control to take a look at each individual project that would come in front using their same analysis that you have some exceptions when it comes to the, health and safety, the environment, etc. So I'd like you and the staff to explore that avenue further, because that's what came from them. Those that are imposing those guidelines on us. That's all I say.
Mayor Pro Tem Sternquist, that would be an incredibly in-depth analysis across the board and trying to understand some of the unintended consequences. Our approach that we've taken so far, and we'll follow, the suggestions of council. Our approach here has been trying to, similar to the manner that which we dealt with ADUs, try to find every element that we can go through. I understand the concern and we'll take a look, but that's really the approach that we've taken here is very similar to the approach that we took with ADUs as well. And, and we've heard from the council, we'll make sure to follow through on those things, but that's why that wasn't really presented as an option going forward, because we're taking a more smaller bites at the apple related to this and understanding how significant this legislation is. But that was kind of why you see some of the options that are there as well.
Right. I'm just not comfortable with just those options. And I think that because of what this can do to our city, I think we need to take a deep dive into it. I don't want just the minimal bites and pieces. Maybe that's what we need is a deeper analysis. I don't know. I mean, we've hired consultants for other things, but that's my opinion. That's what I would prefer. I'm not comfortable with, saying I think we should do number 1 through 6 right now. I think there's just too much on the table and too much for our city to lose. That's all. Thanks.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. As for me, I think we really need to look at the SB 9 a little closer, why we're all kind of reacting to it. I think the taking away the local control is just another aspect of many of the state laws, not just for SB 9. I think the reason why we're all reacting to it is the fact that it actually destroys the R1, the single family neighborhood that we also love, and the reason why we all moved to Temple City. And many of us have lived here for 30, 40 years, and that's really the reason why we're here. And so just so they're trying to find a way to get rid of SB 9's applicability to Temple City by zoning to R2, I think we're actually getting the opposite effect. I mean, what does R2 mean? R2 means much smaller and denser development. So switching to R2, while it retains your local control, it is not getting it's not getting rid of the issue of this bill. This bill is making our city denser in areas that we don't think should be dense. And so in my opinion, R2 is not the answer. Looking at SB 9, it's again, it's been said before, it's really, again, the state taking a very unrealistic, simplistic approach to urban design. They're treating California basically as it's like a flat earth approach, and everything that from Sacramento should apply to everywhere and should be good. And unfortunately, that is so far from the truth. I look at I think staff have done a great job in analyzing it. And I'm actually really surprised that SB 9, in spite of all its what it wants to do, had left out some of the very major loopholes in its own bill. I mean, many of the things that Mr. Reamer had pointed out, I think are really the key chinks in the armor, if you will, of SB 9. And I think by limiting through new development standards would be a good way to control the outcome of the SB 9, because after all, it's not so much losing the local control that I have issue with. It's really the consequence of SB 9 making the city denser and in ways that are very anti-single family. So if we can reduce the impact of that, I'm actually I don't have too much of an issue with it. So I'm totally open to, first of all, historic preservation impact fees. I'm really not in favor of those, because I think we're punishing people unintently. I think some of the other aspects, the Director Rima brought up the affordability. And actually, I was very pleasantly surprised by the affordability requirements, also the whole notion of not allowing parking. You know, in some ways, that's a cultural shift. And if I were think a little deeper into it, and maybe that's the future. Maybe have smaller units, the unit that don't need parking because we have self-driving cars in 20, 30 years and all that. So if we were gonna do affordability, I'm for that, but that needs to go with the no parking, no on-site or on-site. I'm all for if we're gonna go denser. I'm all for having to mitigate that by a higher environmental standard. The design standard, new development standard, yeah, I'm all for that. And coming back, I would definitely say that the city had decided at one point to go single story on all flat lots because of density flat lot imposed on the city. I think the same single story height limit would also should be imposed on an urban lot splits. And finally, one point that Council Member Chavez brought up, maybe we seemingly were rushing it tonight, but I do believe that maybe if the council and the planning commission feels like that we need to have another meeting, I'm open to that to discuss this further. So those are my comments. We were told that this is being a study session. We don't really need a motion, but before we adjourn to the city council meeting, I know we're kind of running late. We're running 30 minutes late, but I would just want to ask both the commission as well as the city council, do you have any further comments that you would like to share at this point? Hearing none, so I just want to ask Mr. Cook and Director Remus, what we discussed tonight, do you need any further clarifications?
No, I think we've received some good input, and we'll come back in a month or two, depending on which body you're in, and with an ordinance and a plan for moving forward after that. Okay.
Well, thank you so very much. I think you and your staff have done a terrific job in analyzing the SB9. And I also want to take this opportunity to thank our commissioners for your service and a great meeting tonight. And with that, I will adjourn our meeting. And I think the council members and staff will probably can use a 10-minute break before we reconvene. So we're going to come back and start a regular meeting in 10 minutes.
Recording stopped.
Are we staying on this or are we leaving and coming back?
It will be the same meeting link, council member.